Have you ever seen a man refuse the very honor everyone else dreams of receiving? The question hung in the air like a bell that refused to stop ringing. More than 600 people filled the grand auditorium that evening. Veterans in dark jackets, military families, local officials, community leaders. Rows of polished seats stretched beneath warm lights that reflected softly against the wooden walls. On the massive screen above the stage, a photograph appeared. An elderly man standing quietly beside an American flag. The audience immediately recognized him. Jack Whitmore, 86 years old, Marine Corps veteran. The master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone, smiling proudly. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor a man whose service and dedication have inspired generations. The room erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. People rose from their seats almost instantly. Some clapped. Others whistled. A few veterans stood at attention. The standing ovation grew larger with every second. It rolled across the auditorium like a wave. Then something unexpected happened. Slowly, carefully, Jack Whitmore stepped onto the stage. His gray suit looked older than many people in the room. The cuffs were slightly worn. His shoes were polished but modest. He carried no medals, no ribbons, no symbols of rank, just a simple American flag pin on his lapel. The applause continued. Louder now, stronger. But Jack did not smile. He did not wave. He did not acknowledge the celebration. Instead, he raised one hand. Not high, just enough. The motion was small, yet somehow the entire room noticed. One by one, the clapping began to fade. The cheers weakened. Conversations stopped. Silence slowly settled across the auditorium. Jack lowered his hand and gently shook his head. No, it was not anger. It was not embarrassment. It was something else, something impossible to understand. The master of ceremonies blinked in confusion. The audience exchanged puzzled looks. Standing ovations were accepted, appreciated, expected. Nobody refused them, especially not someone being honored. Yet Jack stood there as if the attention made him uncomfortable, as if the praise belonged somewhere else. For several long seconds, nobody knew what to do. Then Jack quietly approached the microphone. The room was so silent that the faint hum of the air conditioning could be heard. He looked across the audience. Hundreds of faces stared back at him, waiting, curious, confused. His pale blue eyes moved slowly from row to row. There was no pride in them, no excitement, only a strange sadness hidden beneath decades of quiet discipline. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm and steady. Please sit down. People obeyed almost immediately. Chairs folded. The room settled. Jack glanced toward the giant screen displaying his photograph. For a moment, his expression changed. A flicker of something old. A memory. A burden. Then it disappeared. I appreciate your kindness, he said softly. But this recognition was never meant for me. A murmur spread through the crowd. The words made no sense. The award carried his name. The event had been organized for him. Yet he sounded almost determined to reject it. Near the back of the auditorium, a 23-year-old journalism student named Olivia Grant leaned forward in her seat. Something felt wrong. Not dramatic wrong. Not dangerous wrong. Just incomplete. As if everyone in the room had been invited to celebrate a story they didn't fully understand. Then she noticed something strange. As Jack stepped away from the microphone, a small worn photograph slipped from the inside pocket of his jacket and drifted silently to the stage floor. Olivia could not explain why her heart suddenly began beating faster. The photograph was nothing special at first glance. It was small, faded, and worn soft by time. The corners were bent. A faint crease ran through the middle where it had been folded and unfolded countless times over the years. Yet something about it felt important. While the audience remained focused on Jack Whitmore, Olivia quietly slipped from her seat and moved closer to the stage. The event organizers were busy preparing for the next speaker. Nobody noticed the photograph resting near the edge of the platform. She picked it up carefully. The image showed a young boy standing beside an old pickup truck. He could not have been older than 10. The picture itself revealed nothing unusual. But when Olivia turned it over, she froze. Written in faded blue ink were 6 simple words. Thank you for saving my future. Olivia read the sentence twice. Then a third time. There was no signature. No date. No explanation. Just those words. She looked up toward the stage. Jack had already returned to his seat near the front row. He sat quietly with his hands folded in his lap while another speaker addressed the audience. The spotlight was gone. The attention had shifted elsewhere. Yet somehow he looked more isolated now than before. Olivia slipped the photograph into her notebook. She told herself she would return it later. The explanation sounded reasonable. The truth was that curiosity had already taken hold. Nearly an hour later, the ceremony ended. People gathered around Jack hoping to shake his hand or take photographs. He accepted each interaction politely, but there was a distance in his eyes, a careful restraint, as though he had spent a lifetime avoiding attention and still did not know how to receive it. Olivia waited until the crowd thinned. Then she approached. "Mr. Whitmore?" she asked. Jack turned toward her. Up close, he appeared even older than he had on stage. Deep lines marked his face. His silver hair was neatly combed. His expression remained calm. "Yes." Olivia held up the photograph. "I think this belongs to you." For the first time all evening, something changed. It lasted less than a second. A flicker of surprise. Maybe concern. Then it disappeared. Jack gently took the photograph from her hand. His thumb rested against the image of the boy. He stared at it for several seconds. "Thank you," he said quietly. Olivia hesitated. "Who is he?" Jack looked at the picture again. A faint smile appeared. Not joyful. More like a memory returning from far away. "A good man," he said. "That is all that matters." Olivia waited for more. Nothing came. "Was he family?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "No. Someone you served with." Another small shake of the head. The answer only deepened the mystery. Olivia glanced at the message written on the back. "What does saving my future mean?" This time Jack did not answer immediately. His gaze drifted toward the dark auditorium where rows of empty seats stretched into the shadows. The silence lingered long enough to become uncomfortable. Finally he spoke. "Sometimes people believe they need a miracle." His voice was low and thoughtful. "Most of the time they just need someone who cares enough to show up." Before Olivia could ask another question, an event volunteer approached and informed Jack that his ride had arrived. He nodded politely. Then he slipped the photograph back into his jacket pocket. As he turned to leave, Olivia noticed something she had missed before. A small tear in the inside lining of the jacket. And beneath it, barely visible, the edge of a thick envelope stuffed with dozens of old photographs. Olivia barely slept that night. The image of the thick envelope hidden inside Jack Whitmore's jacket refused to leave her mind. By sunrise, she was sitting at a small table inside a quiet coffee shop 3 blocks from the university, her laptop open and a legal pad covered with notes. The rain tapped softly against the window. Commuters hurried past carrying umbrellas. The ordinary rhythm of the morning felt strangely distant. Olivia kept thinking about the photograph and the sentence written on the back. "Thank you for saving my future." She entered Jack Whitmore's name into every public database she could access. The results surprised her. There was almost nothing. No best-selling memoir. No interviews. No foundation bearing his name. No speaking tours. No major awards beyond a few military records and community service mentions scattered across several decades. For a man honored by an entire auditorium, he seemed almost invisible. That was when she noticed something unusual. A local newspaper article from 22 years earlier mentioned a scholarship recipient who had received anonymous financial assistance after losing both parents. Olivia followed the trail. The recipient was now a federal judge in Chicago. She sent an email expecting no response. 20 minutes later, her phone rang. The judge agreed to speak. His voice carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to making important decisions. When Olivia mentioned Jack Whitmore, silence filled the line. Several seconds passed. Then the judge laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because he seemed genuinely stunned. "I have not heard that name in years," he said. Olivia asked if Jack had funded his education. "No," the judge replied. "He did something far more important." Olivia waited. The judge continued. "When everyone else disappeared, he showed up." The answer only deepened the mystery. Before she could ask more, the judge politely ended the conversation, explaining that some stories belonged to Jack, not to him. Olivia immediately searched for another lead. A trauma surgeon in Denver, then an airline captain in Texas, then a business owner in Ohio. Each conversation followed the same pattern. The moment they heard Jack's name, their tone changed. Respect, gratitude, emotion. Yet none would explain exactly what he had done. By late afternoon, Olivia had mapped more than 30 names across the country. Different ages, different careers, different backgrounds. They shared no obvious connection except one. At some critical moment in their lives, Jack Whitmore had appeared. Then, just as quietly, he had vanished. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Olivia leaned back in her chair and stared at the growing collection of notes spread across the table. The rain outside had stopped. Golden sunlight broke through the clouds. For the first time, she stopped asking who Jack Whitmore had been. A more important question had emerged. How many lives had he changed? As she organized her papers, a new email notification appeared on her screen. The sender was unknown. The message contained only one sentence. If you truly want to understand Jack Whitmore, stop looking for records and start looking for people. Attached beneath the message was a list of 12 names and a single scanned photograph showing a much younger Jack standing beside a group of strangers whose faces were filled with tears. Olivia stared at the photograph on her laptop screen long after sunset. The faces looking back at her were ordinary people. A teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, a small business owner. None appeared wealthy. None appeared famous. Yet every face carried the same expression. Gratitude. The kind that could not be staged. The kind that came from surviving something life-changing. She enlarged the image. There was Jack Whitmore standing quietly near the edge of the group. Not in the center. Not posing proudly. Almost hidden. As though he had intentionally stepped out of the spotlight. The more Olivia looked at the picture, the more she realized something unsettling. Every person seemed focused on Jack, but Jack was looking at them. The next morning, she began calling the names from the anonymous list. The first number belonged to a retired elementary school teacher in Missouri. The woman answered after 2 rings. The moment Olivia mentioned Jack Whitmore, emotion entered her voice. I wondered if someone would eventually ask about him, she said softly. Olivia expected another vague answer. Instead, the woman told a story. 28 years earlier, her husband had passed away unexpectedly. She had been left alone with 2 children and a mountain of bills. One afternoon, a stranger knocked on her door. He carried groceries. He helped repair a leaking roof. Before leaving, he handed her an envelope containing enough money to keep her family afloat for several months. Was it Jack? Olivia asked. Yes, the woman replied. But he made me promise never to tell anyone. Olivia wrote furiously. Then she called the next name. A mechanic in Kansas. The story was different. The outcome was the same. During the worst period of his life, a quiet veteran had appeared and helped him rebuild. Then came the nurse in Oregon, the business owner in Alabama, the former firefighter in Colorado. Every conversation added another piece to the puzzle. Different people, different states, different decades. Yet the pattern never changed. Jack arrived when hope was running out. He offered help without judgment. Then he disappeared before anyone could thank him properly. By the end of the day, Olivia had filled nearly 40 pages of notes. Her desk looked like the command center of an investigation. Names connected by lines. Dates circled in red. Photographs scattered everywhere. But one detail stood out above everything else. Nobody knew how Jack had found them. Nobody knew why he chose them. And nobody knew how many others existed. As she reviewed her notes, her phone vibrated. A new email had arrived from the same anonymous sender. Attached was a spreadsheet. Olivia opened it and felt her breath catch. The document contained hundreds of entries stretching back more than 3 decades. Names, dates, addresses, scholarship payments, medical expenses, emergency assistance, housing support. The list seemed endless. At the bottom of the final page sat a number highlighted in yellow. Olivia read it twice to make sure she had not misunderstood. 417 families. Her eyes widened. The auditorium audience believed they were honoring a veteran for his service. They had no idea that the greatest thing Jack Whitmore had ever done might have happened long after he took off the uniform. The number refused to leave Olivia's mind. 417 families. She sat alone in her apartment long after midnight, staring at the spreadsheet glowing on her screen. Outside, the city had gone quiet. The traffic had faded. The sidewalks were empty. Yet her thoughts kept racing. 417 families meant hundreds of stories. Hundreds of moments when someone had been standing at the edge of despair and somehow found help. Not from a government agency. Not from a wealthy corporation. From one elderly veteran living in a modest house outside town. The math alone made no sense. Olivia opened a map and began plotting addresses from the spreadsheet. Dots appeared across the country. Maine, Texas, Arizona, Washington, Florida. The pattern spread from coast to coast. She expected to find a foundation behind it, some hidden organization, some network of donors. Instead, every trail led back to the same name, Jack Whitmore. At 2 o'clock in the morning, she noticed another column buried deep within the records. Most entries listed financial assistance. Others listed housing support. Some referenced scholarships. But a small group contained only 2 words. Personal visit. Olivia clicked through dozens of entries. The notation appeared again and again. No money. No services. Just a visit. Curious, she contacted another person from the list the following morning. His name was Daniel Mercer, a retired airline mechanic living outside Nashville. When she mentioned the spreadsheet, Daniel became silent. Then he surprised her. "You are looking at the wrong thing," he said. Olivia frowned. "The assistance?" "No," Daniel replied. "The money." Olivia waited. "What do you mean?" A soft chuckle came through the phone. "Everyone thinks Jack changed lives because he paid bills. That is not what made him special." Olivia glanced at her notes. "Then what did?" Daniel took a long breath. "He stayed." The answer puzzled her. Daniel explained. 20 years earlier, after losing nearly everything during a difficult period in his life, he had withdrawn from friends and family. One rainy afternoon, a stranger knocked on his door. Jack. He arrived carrying a toolbox and a paper bag filled with sandwiches. He repaired a broken porch railing, shared lunch, listened more than he talked. Then he came back the next week. And the week after that. Sometimes they worked on projects. Sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes they simply watched baseball on television. "He gave me money once," Daniel admitted. "But that is not what saved me. Plenty of people can write a check. Jack gave me his time." Olivia ended the call and stared out the window. The realization hit her slowly. Every story she had collected shared the same hidden thread. Jack never seemed interested in being a hero. He never tried to rescue people dramatically. Instead, he appeared when they felt forgotten. He stayed when others left. And somehow that simple act changed everything. Later that afternoon, Olivia received another message from the anonymous sender. There was no greeting, no signature, only a scanned page from an old notebook written in Jack's handwriting. One sentence had been underlined twice. "If people feel seen, they can survive almost anything." Olivia read the words again. Then she noticed something else at the bottom of the page. A date. It matched the year of a military deployment listed in Jack's service record. And for the first time, Olivia began to suspect that whatever had driven him to help hundreds of strangers might have started with something he experienced long before anyone in that auditorium had ever heard his name. Olivia spent the next 3 days following a trail that seemed to grow larger every hour. The notebook page remained pinned beside her desk. "If people feel seen, they can survive almost anything." The sentence had become more than a clue. It felt like a window into the man she was trying to understand. She requested archived military records, old newspaper articles, community bulletins, and public documents from towns where Jack Whitmore had lived over the years. Most revealed very little. Jack appeared only briefly, then disappeared again. Yet a pattern continued to emerge. Wherever he went, lives quietly improved. A struggling youth center received anonymous funding. A family facing eviction suddenly found assistance. A small scholarship appeared for a student who had nowhere else to turn. None carried Jack's name. None sought recognition. Late on Thursday afternoon, Olivia drove 2 hours to visit a retired pastor whose name appeared repeatedly throughout her research. The church sat beside a narrow country road surrounded by rolling fields. The pastor, Reverend Thomas Keller, welcomed her into a modest office lined with worn books and faded photographs. When she mentioned Jack Whitmore, the elderly minister smiled immediately. "I wondered when someone would start asking questions," he said. Olivia opened her notebook. "Everyone says the same thing. He helped people, but nobody explains why." The Reverend leaned back in his chair and stared toward the window. For a moment, he seemed to drift into memory. "Because he never wanted the story to be about him," he replied. "Then who was it about?" Olivia asked. The Reverend stood and walked toward a filing cabinet in the corner. After searching through several drawers, he returned carrying a thin manila folder. Inside was a single photograph. Olivia recognized Jack instantly, though he looked decades younger. He stood beside 4 other men outside a military building. Their uniforms were neat, their smiles genuine. Yet something about the image felt different from the others she had seen. The Reverend carefully pointed toward one man standing beside Jack. Do you know who that is? Olivia shook her head. His name was Michael Dawson. The Reverend's voice softened. They were close friends. Olivia studied the photograph. Michael appeared young, confident, and full of life. What happened to him? She asked quietly. The Reverend hesitated before answering. Life happened. Hard years. Difficult struggles. Eventually, he felt forgotten. Olivia felt a chill despite the warm room. The Reverend continued. Jack never forgot him. Not for a single day. He opened the folder further and revealed dozens of letters. Every one had been written by Jack. Some stretched across decades. Holiday cards. Encouraging notes. Invitations. Updates. Evidence of a friendship carefully maintained over a lifetime. Olivia slowly turned the pages. The handwriting remained consistent. Steady. Thoughtful. Present. Then she noticed something unusual. One letter contained a sentence that had been underlined. The exact same sentence from the notebook. If people feel seen, they can survive almost anything. Olivia looked up. Michael wrote this. The Reverend shook his head. No. He tapped the letter gently. Michael said it to Jack many years ago. Jack spent the rest of his life proving it was true. As Olivia stared at the photograph, another realization settled over her. The hundreds of people she had been tracking were not separate stories. They were all connected to a promise Jack Whitmore had made long ago. A promise nobody in that auditorium knew existed. And somewhere, hidden among the letters and records, was the event that had changed the course of his entire life. Olivia left the church carrying 2 boxes of letters, photocopies, and photographs. The late afternoon sun hung low above the horizon, painting the fields in gold. Yet she barely noticed the scenery. Her mind was fixed on one question. What promise had Jack Whitmore made, and why had he spent decades quietly honoring it? Back at her apartment, she worked through the night. Page after page revealed the same pattern. Jack never wrote about himself. Every letter focused on someone else. Their struggles, their victories, their families, their dreams. It was as if he had dedicated his entire life to reminding people that they mattered. Then, just after midnight, Olivia discovered something that changed everything. Hidden among the letters was an old newspaper clipping. The article was more than 40 years old. The paper had yellowed with age. The headline was small and easy to miss. Local veteran launches community outreach project. Olivia read every line carefully. The project described in the article sounded familiar. Visiting isolated families, mentoring struggling young adults, providing emergency support, building connections. It was the earliest version of the same work Jack had continued for decades. But one sentence near the bottom caught her attention. The program was created in memory of a friend. No name was listed. Olivia immediately searched through the remaining documents. Hours later, she found another clue. An old dedication card tucked inside a photo album. To Michael, we will make sure nobody feels forgotten. Olivia stared at the words. Suddenly, the pieces began falling into place. The promise, the letters, the visits, the scholarships, the hundreds of families. None of it had started as a charitable mission. It had started as a personal commitment between 2 friends. Early the next morning, Olivia received a phone call from the anonymous sender who had been guiding her investigation. For the first time, the person agreed to speak. The voice belonged to an elderly woman named Margaret Dawson, Michael's younger sister. Her voice trembled with emotion as she shared memories from decades earlier. Jack visited my brother every week, she said softly. No matter how busy life became, no matter where he lived, he always showed up. Olivia listened carefully. Did Michael know what Jack would eventually do? Margaret laughed through tears. Not at all. He would have been shocked. Then her tone became serious. The truth is, Michael changed Jack as much as Jack changed everyone else. Olivia asked if she could explain. A long silence followed. Finally, Margaret answered. There was one conversation. One afternoon. After that day, Jack was never the same. Olivia gripped the phone tighter. She sensed she was approaching the heart of the story. The moment everything began. What happened? She asked quietly. Margaret took a slow breath. Michael told Jack that people do not break because life becomes difficult. They break when they believe nobody sees them anymore. The room felt suddenly still. Olivia remembered the notebook, the underlined sentence, the hundreds of names, the decades of service. Everything traced back to that single idea. But Margaret was not finished. There is something else you need to know, she said. The event next week was never supposed to honor Jack alone. Olivia frowned. What do you mean? On the other end of the line, Margaret's voice softened almost to a whisper. Because dozens of the people he helped are already coming. And they have no idea how many others are coming too. The morning of the gathering arrived beneath a clear autumn sky. A cool breeze moved through the rows of flags outside the Civic Center as volunteers prepared chairs and checked microphones. Inside, nobody realized they were about to witness something far larger than a simple recognition ceremony. Olivia arrived early carrying boxes of notes, photographs, and copies of letters she had spent days collecting. She had expected a modest crowd. Instead, she found people arriving from every direction. A woman stepped out of a taxi carrying a worn scrapbook. A man in a business suit walked in holding an old photograph. A young physician arrived with his family. Then came a judge, a teacher, a pilot, a retired firefighter. None of them seemed to know one another. Yet each wore the same expression. Quiet anticipation. Olivia watched as strangers began introducing themselves. Within minutes, a remarkable pattern emerged. Every conversation started differently and ended exactly the same way. Someone would mention Jack Whitmore. Then another person would smile and say, "He helped me too." The reactions were immediate. Eyes widened. Heads shook in disbelief. Stories began flowing across the room. One person described receiving encouragement during a difficult season. Another recalled an unexpected scholarship. Someone else remembered weekly visits that lasted for years. The atmosphere changed with every conversation. What had started as a gathering became a reunion of lives connected by a single man. By noon, more than 100 people had arrived. Olivia stood near the back of the auditorium taking notes as realization spread through the crowd. For decades, each person had believed their experience with Jack was unique. Now they were discovering they were part of something much larger. Then the doors opened again. A hush swept through the room. Jack Whitmore entered quietly, dressed in the same gray suit he had worn before. He froze after only a few steps. The conversation stopped. Dozens of faces turned toward him. Faces he recognized. Some from 30 years ago. Some from 20. Some from only a few years earlier. One by one, people began standing. Not because they were instructed to. Not because a program told them to. They simply stood. A woman approached first. Tears filled her eyes as she handed Jack a photograph he had taken with her family decades earlier. Then another person stepped forward. Then another. The line continued growing. Each carried a memory. A letter. A picture. A story. Jack looked overwhelmed. His shoulders lowered. His eyes moved from face to face as if struggling to understand what was happening. Olivia noticed something she had never seen before. The quiet certainty that always surrounded him seemed to crack. Emotion appeared in its place. Yet the greatest surprise had not arrived. Near the entrance, several volunteers rolled in a large display board covered by a cloth. Attached to the back was a sealed envelope addressed to Jack in handwriting he would recognize instantly. The name written beneath the seal belonged to someone from the photograph that had started everything. Michael Dawson. And when Jack saw it, the color drained from his face. The auditorium became so quiet that the faint rustle of paper could be heard as Margaret Dawson carefully carried the sealed envelope to the center of the stage. Jack remained motionless. His eyes never left the familiar handwriting. For a moment, he looked less like the steady veteran everyone admired and more like a man standing face to face with a memory he had never expected to see again. Margaret stopped beside him and gently placed the envelope in his hands. "Michael wanted you to have this," she said. Her voice trembled. "He left instructions many years ago." Across the room, more than 100 people watched in complete silence. Olivia stood near the back, notebook forgotten at her side. Every conversation, every photograph, every letter had led to this moment. Jack carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter and a single photograph. The photograph showed two young men sitting on the tailgate of an old pickup truck beneath a summer sky. Jack immediately recognized it. He smiled softly. Then he unfolded the letter. His hands shook slightly as he began to read. The room remained silent. After several moments, Jack lowered the page and closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, Margaret stepped forward and addressed the audience. "Michael wrote this before he passed away," she said. "He wanted it shared if Jack ever tried to avoid being recognized for what he had done." A faint ripple of laughter moved through the crowd because everyone now understood how perfectly that described him. Margaret continued reading from a copy of the letter. Jack, if you are hearing these words, then I already know what you tried to do. You tried to make this day about everyone else, just like you always did. But some truths deserve to be seen. You once promised me that nobody should feel forgotten. Then you spent the rest of your life keeping that promise for people you had never even met. Many in the audience wiped away tears. Others lowered their heads. The stories they had shared suddenly became part of something much larger. Margaret's voice grew stronger. You never measured success by awards, titles, or applause. You measured it by whether another person felt seen. Because of that, hundreds of families found hope when they needed it most. Hundreds of lives changed direction. Hundreds of people discovered they mattered. She lowered the page. Then she smiled. And now they are all here to remind you that you mattered too. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then a woman near the front slowly stood. Next came a judge. Then a pilot. Then a teacher. Then an entire row. Within moments, every person in the auditorium was on their feet. The applause began softly but quickly grew into something powerful. Not loud because of excitement. Loud because of gratitude. Jack looked around the room at faces spanning generations. Faces connected by kindness, sacrifice, and simple acts of showing up. This time he did not raise a hand to stop them. He simply stood there, humbled by a truth he had spent decades trying to hide. Olivia watched as the standing ovation continued. It lasted longer than anyone could remember. And for the first time, Jack Whitmore accepted it. Not because he believed he deserved it, but because he finally understood that the applause was never for what he had accomplished. It was for the countless people whose lives had been touched by one quiet promise. Above the stage, sunlight streamed through the high windows and illuminated the photograph of two old friends. Beneath it, the audience remained standing. And in that moment, everyone present learned the same lesson Jack had spent a lifetime teaching. The greatest legacy is not what people remember about you. It is how many people remember who they are because of you.